911, what's your emergency?
Someone's been pulled under, right in the tank. It's just under the surface.
Who's down there? Can you see them?
I just see a shadow, huge, circling.
The dispatcher's voice stays steady, but the line crackles with wind. A man is shouting short, ragged breaths between words about something in the water, something too fast, too close. In the background, you can hear the faint slap of waves against the acrylic walls. And then, nothing. The shouting stops. The wind dies. All that's left is the low, hollow groan of metal under strain, as if the sea itself is holding its breath. And then, just before the silence swallows the call, a single splash echoes heavy, deliberate, and far too near. If stories like this pull you in, stay with us. This one is told exactly as it happened, honest, unvarnished, and unforgettable. Your thoughts and voices matter here, so share them as we go. And if you want more real-life accounts of nature's most powerful encounters, don't forget to like this video, share it with others, and subscribe so you never miss a story. The morning air at Pacific Horizon Marine Park was crisp enough to sting the nose. Beyond the glass walls of the main Orca tank, the wide mouth of Monterey Bay shimmered under a pale gold sun. Hannah Reyes stood on the damp concrete platform, wetsuit zipped halfway, her breath faint in the chill. She had always loved these early hours before the crowds came, when the water lay still except for the gentle slap of waves against the acrylic. The smell of salt was heavy, mingled with the faint tang of fish from the prep room. She crouched to watch Tidebreaker glide beneath her, his black and white form cutting a slow path through the deep blue. At over 11,000 pounds, he usually moved with a quiet strength, each turn measured, but today his pace was sluggish, his surfacing irregular. His dorsal fin broke the water without the usual spray, sinking again like a shadow sliding down a wall. Hannah rapped her knuckles lightly on the edge of the platform, a habit she used to draw his attention. No response. She leaned forward, searching for his eyes, and when she found them, they looked clouded, as if something far away held him. A gust from the bay swept across the open amphitheater, rattling the aluminum bleachers and carrying a damp cold through her wetsuit. She rose, rubbing her arms. Behind her, a seagull cried overhead, its call sharp in the empty morning. The sudden crack of water made her spin. Tidebreaker's tail struck the surface with force, sending a burst of white foam high into the air. The sound rolled through the vacant seating, hollow and strange without an audience to absorb it. Hannah stepped back instinctively, the soles of her shoes squeaking on wet concrete. When she looked down again, he was there, hovering just below, eyes fixed on hers. Neither of them moved. The hum of the filtration system filled the silence, steady and low, but it only seemed to make the stillness heavier. Somewhere deep in her chest, Hannah felt the first faint pull of unease. The training room smelled faintly of wet neoprene and disinfectant. Hannah stepped in, pulling her wetsuit sleeves down as the crackling voice over the loudspeakers announced the day's show schedule. Jacob sat on the bench, lacing his boots, his coffee steaming in a paper cup beside him. "Tidebreaker's slow this morning," she said, lowering her voice. Jacob smirked without looking up. "He's just moody. Once the music kicks in, he'll be fine. You know how he is." Hannah didn't answer. She crossed to the desk and flipped open the thick binder of behavior logs. The pages were damp at the edges, smudged with ink from months of quick notes. In the last 3 weeks, Tidebreaker had refused signals 5 times, lingered motionless at the surface for minutes at a stretch. The entries were circled, initialed, but never followed up. Outside, sunlight poured across the concrete walkways of the park. The sky over Monterey Bay had sharpened into a hard blue, and the distant breakwater caught each wave with a hollow thud that carried into the room. Hannah could feel the vibration under her feet. A tech in a faded park polo appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a rag. Heads-up pressure sensor on the main tank threw an error, but it reset itself. Shouldn't be an issue. Jacob waved it off. Those sensors glitch all the time. Hannah kept her gaze on the logbook, the pen marks seeming darker in the bright light. She closed it, sliding it back into place, but the unease stayed with her. In the prep area, she clipped the headset to her collar, testing the mic with a quick breath. The smell of thawing fish drifted from the feed room. Through the wall of glass, she could see the curve of Tidebreaker's back just under the surface. He was still, save for the faint lift of his dorsal fin as the water moved. Her eyes locked on his. For a moment, there was no glare, no reflection, just that steady, unblinking stare from a creature built for open water, but trapped in this silent tank. Hannah felt the hair at the back of her neck lift. She adjusted the mic, but didn't look away until he sank slowly out of sight. The low rumble of the filtration pumps merged with the rhythmic wash of the tank's artificial waves. Over it all, the sound crew tested the show's soundtrack, a thin melody echoing in the cavernous amphitheater. Hannah stood at the edge of the platform, the toes of her sneakers just inches from the slick lip. Tidebreaker's shadow drifted far below, each slow sweep of his tail stirring a swirl of bubbles that glimmered in the deep green-blue water. He angled sideways without warning, his white eye patch flashing pale in the dim light. Then came the sound low, resonant, almost too deep to hear, more felt in the chest than in the ears. It rolled up through the water like a voice from the open ocean. Hannah froze, her hand tightening around the safety rail. Behind her, the first groups of visitors began filtering into the stands. Their voices rose in scattered bursts, bright and casual, the laughter bouncing off the concrete tiers. She tried to focus on the normal rhythm of the pre-show, but the uneasy pulse in her gut refused to fade. Jacob strode over, headset crooked on his neck, grinning as he caught her eye. "He's fine, just saving his energy," he said, as if that explained everything. Hannah nodded without committing to agreement. She'd seen the missed cues last week, the way Tidebreaker had hovered at the surface like driftwood, unresponsive to calls. Those moments sat in her mind now, heavy as stones. A sudden gust came in from the bay, funneling through the open sides of the structure. It carried the damp bite of salt water, and the fabric backdrop behind the stage rattled in the wind. Hannah pulled the collar of her wetsuit higher, feeling the cold sink into her skin. She crouched to check the harness strap fixed to the platform, fingers working over the wet metal buckles. The smell of fish feed hung in the air, sharp and oily. From the corner of her eye, a mass rose from below. Tidebreaker surged upward, the bulk of his body blotting out the sunlit surface. The light dimmed across the platform as his shadow loomed over her. She straightened slowly, finding herself face to face with the orca's unblinking stare. The water around him was still, as if holding its breath. Then, without a sound, he rolled away and slid down into the depths, his shape dissolving into darkness. A chill laced her spine, one she couldn't shake, and she realized how little space there was between her and the water, just one step, and she'd be in with him. The first swell of music rolled across the amphitheater, chased by the roar of the crowd. Hannah stepped into the open, the damp heat of the stage lights clinging to her skin despite the breeze funneling in from the bay. Her practiced smile felt heavier than usual, but she kept her shoulders square, headset steady. From the deep end of the tank, Tidebreaker burst upward on cue, his massive body arcing high before crashing back down in a sheet of water that drenched the front row. The audience erupted, cameras flashing, children squealing. As he passed beneath her platform, Hannah's eyes caught on the familiar pale lines along his flank scars from years past, each with its own story. But just above them, she spotted something new, a fresh scrape, jagged and raw, glinting in the filtered light. It was gone in an instant as he slipped beneath the surface, but the image stuck. When the routine broke for a transition, she made her way quickly to the control room. The smell of salt water and electronics mingled in the narrow space. She leaned toward the shift supervisor, keeping her voice low. "He's off today, and there's a fresh injury on his side. We should pull him." The man didn't glance up from his monitor. "Full house out there. We can't stop now." The words landed cold. Hannah left without replying, the cheers outside swelling as she stepped back into the light. The air had changed heavier, sharper. The wind from offshore carried a fine mist that clung to her hair and wetsuit, the taste of salt sharp on her lips. Tidebreaker reappeared for the next segment, but twice he skimmed past his mark, ignoring her hand signals. Instead of tight turns, he circled wide, sliding down into the deeper end and staying there longer. Hannah's pulse quickened. She adjusted her stance, signaling again, trying to anchor the routine. The crowd saw only spectacle, but Hannah could feel the rhythm fraying. When it came time for the close contact set piece, she stepped onto the submerged platform, water swirling around her waist. She raised her arm for the approach. Tidebreaker didn't move. He hung just a few yards away, broad head angled toward her, eyes locked. The water between them was eerily still. The hum of the pumps pressed in around her. Without warning, a rolling surge from the wave generator slammed into the platform, sending a spray of white foam over her shoulders. She blinked the salt from her eyes and found him still there, unmoving, gaze unbroken. The crowd's cheer rolled over the water as the deep bass of the show's soundtrack signaled the close contact routine. Hannah stepped down onto the submerged platform, the chill of the tank biting into her legs as the water closed around her waist. The air smelled thick with salt and fish oil. Tidebreaker broke the surface in front of her, his sleek head rising until the tip of his rostrum hovered inches from her palm. She steadied her breath, eyes on his, when without warning, he swung away in a tight arc. The slap of his tail sent a wall of water cascading into the first rows, drenching shrieking children and laughing parents. It would have been charming if not for the way he moved sharp, deliberate, not part of any choreography. Hannah lifted her arm again, the cue for him to return. Instead, a low vibration pulsed through the water, deep enough to hum in her bones. It was the same sound she'd heard once before during a storm off the bay, when the swells were high and the wind howled. She turned her head toward the open side of the amphitheater. The wind had picked up, dragging the cold scent of the Pacific into her lungs. A blur of black and white surged from the far end of the tank. Tidebreaker came at her fast, skimming the surface. She felt the displacement before she saw him, the water swirling hard around her knees, unbalancing her. She took half a step back, boots slipping on the algae-slick platform. Her training screamed for control slow movements, calm posture, but every nerve in her body was on edge. The eyes that locked on her now weren't the warm, intelligent ones she knew. They were flat, unreadable, dark as the open ocean at midnight. The platform rocked under the surge of another wave, and she planted her feet wide, refusing to flinch. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew this was the point of no return. Whatever had been simmering beneath the surface between them had shifted, and there was no coaxing it back to safety. Tidebreaker slowed just enough to circle her once, the smooth rise of his back brushing the water close to her hip. Then he slipped beneath the surface again, leaving only a spiral of bubbles and the oppressive silence of deep water. The surge came without warning. One moment the water was still around her waist, the next it exploded upward, Tidebreaker's bulk slicing through the surface. His jaws clamped down on Hannah's arm with crushing force, the pressure so sudden it knocked the air from her lungs. The roar of the crowd turned into a wall of screams, blending with the violent slap of water against concrete. Cold engulfed her as she was yanked below. Light fractured into thin beams above her head, twisting through the churn of white bubbles. She kicked hard, muscles straining, but the pull was relentless, a living current dragging her deeper. The sound of her own pulse thudded in her ears, muffled beneath the rush of water. Somewhere above, muffled shouts cut through the din. Jacob's voice, urgent and sharp, barked orders, nets splashed into the tank, cords unraveling like ghostly snakes. The piercing wail of the acoustic deterrent filled the water, the vibration shaking in her bones. Tidebreaker hesitated, loosening his grip just enough for her to break the surface. Air hit her in a gasp, sunlight stabbing her eyes. The wind off Monterey Bay whipped across her soaked face, salt burning her lips. She tried to call out, but barely formed a sound before the water erupted again. The Orca's head rose beside her, black eye fixed on hers, unreadable. Then he lunged, jaws closing around her side this time, the world tilting as they plunged under. The noise from above vanished, replaced by the deep, echoing thrum of the tank. The cold pressed in tighter, wrapping her chest in a vice. She twisted, clawing at his flank, feeling the slick firmness of muscle under skin. The water grew darker as they sank, the surface now a distant shimmer. Her lungs screamed for air, and the salt bit into her throat as she fought to hold it in. The pull finally slowed. For a heartbeat, everything was still just her and the massive shadow holding her in place, suspended in the blue. Then Tidebreaker shifted, and the current around them began to spin, a tightening spiral dragging her further from the light. The water pressed against her ears, turning every sound into a muffled, pounding rhythm. Hannah's heartbeat thudded in her skull, her lungs burning as she kicked and twisted, desperate for air. Tidebreaker's grip was unyielding, pulling her through a vortex that spun the light above into a blur. The cold bit into her skin, seeping through the thin layer of her wetsuit until she could barely feel her fingers. Above, shapes moved along the edge of the tank, Jacob's frame distinct among them, shouting orders Hannah couldn't hear. Two other trainers hauled out a collapsible barrier, their hands trembling as they locked it into place. The amphitheater's seats were emptying in waves. The crowd ushered toward the exits, but dozens stood frozen, their eyes fixed on the water, unable to look away. Without warning, Tidebreaker veered upward, the pressure in Hannah's ears easing as the blue lightened. Her head broke the surface for a single gasp, the air sharp and cold in her chest. She saw the rescue net in front of her, Jacob leaning dangerously over the platform to reach her. Her hand stretched out, fingertips brushing the coarse nylon. The pull came again, sudden and violent, dragging her backward into the churning dark. The surface folded above her, replaced by a wall of white bubbles. The water spun harder, disorienting her until she couldn't tell which way was up. A massive shadow passed beneath her, the curve of Tidebreaker's body blocking what little light remained. He circled once, twice, the power in each stroke vibrating through the water. Her muscles were leaden now, her chest on the verge of giving in. Then, as abruptly as it began, the pressure released. Tidebreaker's jaws opened, and Hannah drifted free, weightless. She didn't move. Her arms floated outward, hair lifting around her face like strands of kelp. Strong arms seized her, pulling her upward through the swirl. The glare of daylight hit her closed eyelids as two trainers heaved her onto the platform. Water poured from her hair, pooling around her still form. Jacob dropped to his knees beside her, his voice raw as he called her name. The wail of the park's alarm system echoed off the steel beams overhead, mixing with the distant crash of waves beyond the breakwater. The sound filled every corner of the arena, an unbroken cry that carried far out into the bay. The sky over Monterey Bay hung low and heavy, the kind of gray that blurred the line between horizon and sea. Wind swept in from the open water, carrying a cold that cut through jackets and scarves. The gates of Pacific Horizon Marine Park were locked, a chain looped tight, warning signs flapping against the fence beyond them. The Orca Stadium stood silent, its tiers of seats empty, its stage damp from days of disuse. Inside the park, Tidebreaker swam slow circles in the isolation pool. The filtered water gleamed under the pale light, but his presence seemed smaller somehow, his movements mechanical. He didn't breach, he didn't roll. His eyes, once sharp and aware, now carried no reflection, as if the light couldn't reach them. News vans lined the road outside the park. Headlines screamed from every screen, killer or victim tragedy at Pacific Horizon. On talk shows and in online debates, voices clashed, some demanding Tidebreaker be retired to a sanctuary, others calling for him to be destroyed. The Reyes family stayed away from the noise. In their small home near the marina, they poured their energy into forming the Hannah Reyes Foundation, dedicated to marine mammal welfare and trainer safety. They spoke softly when reporters came, choosing their words carefully. It wasn't about blame, they said. It was about change. 1 month later, hundreds gathered along the rocky shore for a candlelight vigil. The wind carried the scent of kelp and brine, and the steady hiss of waves against the breakwater filled the spaces between whispered prayers. Flickering flames dotted the crowd, their glow trembling in the cold air. Jacob stood near the front, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. He stared out at the bay, the water darkening as evening fell. Somewhere beyond the moorings, a swell rose and broke, sending a shiver across the surface. Far out, for just a breath, a curved black dorsal fin sliced through the water, then vanished beneath the deep. no one spoke. The music and applause that once echoed over this water were gone. Only the sound of the ocean remained steady, unyielding. In that silence lay the weight of what had been lost, and the question that no one could answer: could the wild ever truly belong inside walls? The last light of the day slid across the water, turning the ripples to molten gold. A woman at the edge of the pier tucked her hands into her sleeves, watching the horizon as if waiting for something she couldn't name. Down the dock, someone lit a single lantern, its glow trembling in the wind. No one spoke. The gulls had gone quiet. Somewhere far out, a fin broke the surface and vanished again, leaving only widening rings. She didn't move, just kept her eyes on that fading mark, as if it might return. And maybe, in its own way, it already had. If moments like this stay with you, help keep these stories alive like this video. Share it with those who'd listen, and subscribe so you won't miss what the next tide brings.